There was a scream, a splash, and then a strange, static buzzing that ended with a loud pop. I didn't even have to check. I knew exactly what had happened. Denise Caldwell's precious surveillance drone had just nosedived into her own pool like a mechanical kamikaze. And all because I had finally reached my breaking point about being watched in my own backyard. Rewind 3 weeks, and the spark that lit this whole firestorm wasn't anything dramatic. It was a bratwurst, a cold soda, and a perfectly innocent Saturday barbecue in Willowbrook Hills. The weather was pristine, blue skies, light breeze, birds chirping. The kind of day that practically begged for grilling and laughter. My wife Rachel had just finished prepping the sides in the kitchen. I was manning the grill like a backyard Gordon Ramsay, flipping burgers with practiced ease. Our daughter, Lily, 15 and always half lost in her earbuds, was curled up on the patio swing with a sci-fi novel. Then we heard it. A high-pitched mechanical whirring, growing louder by the second, like a swarm of robotic bees. I looked up. A shiny, black quadcopter was hovering maybe 20 feet above our yard, its camera aimed squarely downward, like it was filming a documentary. I froze, spatula still in hand, thinking maybe it was some kid's toy. But no, it crept lower, just above the fence line, and the camera slowly zoomed. Not on me, not on the food, but on Lily, who had no idea she was being recorded. That's when something inside me flipped. I waved, shouted at it. Nothing. The drone twitched, floated sideways toward the oak tree near our property line, then zipped back toward the massive 2-story at the end of the cul-de-sac. Denise Caldwell's fortress. Of course. Every neighborhood has that one person. Ours had Denise. She ran the HOA like it was a private military operation. If your lawn was a blade too tall, citation. If your mailbox flag was the wrong shade, warning. If you dared hang string lights past 9 p.m., emergency board meeting. Control wasn't just her habit, it was her oxygen. And now, apparently, she had taken her obsession to the skies. That evening, I marched over and knocked on her oversized front door. She answered in her usual fashion, crisp blouse, oversized wine glass, and a smile so forced it could crack porcelain. Her blonde bob didn't move in the wind. Neither did her expression when I said, "Hey, I think your drone flew over our yard today." "I know," she replied coolly, not even trying to deny it. "Just a routine neighborhood safety check. Someone's been leaving their trash bins out. Sanitation risk, you know." I clenched my jaw. It hovered over my daughter. "That's not safety. That's surveillance." She took a long sip and tilted her head. "If you've got nothing to hide, why worry? Besides, it's legal. It's not like I landed it in your yard." Then she closed the door in my face. Back home, I was livid. Rachel could see it instantly. Lily looked up from the couch, pale. "That thing was outside my window earlier," she whispered. "It's creepy." Monday morning brought our first citation in months. Non-compliant grill cover. It was canvas from Home Depot. I almost laughed, but I knew the game had started. Over the next few days, the notices piled up. Unauthorized decorative rock. Garden shears visible from the street. Illegal wind chime. Yes, we got written up for a wind chime. Every time we stepped outside, the drone was there, buzzing, watching. Rachel stopped hanging laundry. Lily started keeping her curtains drawn. Even the neighbor kids refused to play in the sprinkler anymore. They didn't want to be filmed. It wasn't just harassment. It was surveillance. Psychological warfare. That's when I decided to fight back. I dug into my old files and found the model. Denise's drone wasn't a toy. It was high-end, long-range, real-time feed. Meant for private contractors and law enforcement. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was building a surveillance empire with herself as queen. What Denise didn't know, what no one in Willowbrook Hills knew, was that I, Oliver Trent, used to build counter-surveillance tech for government clients. And she had just picked a fight with the wrong backyard barbecue dad. It wasn't just any drone. It was a high-end surveillance quad with programmable routes, real-time video streaming, and an absurdly long range. This wasn't a toy. It was built for recon. That's when the truth clicked into place. Denise Caldwell wasn't just enforcing HOA rules anymore. She was constructing a mini surveillance empire, with herself as queen, jury, and air traffic control. What Denise didn't know, what no one in Willowbrook Hills could have guessed, was that I used to design counter-surveillance tools for government contractors. For 6 years, I wrote the code that could jam, redirect, or even fry drones in midair. I'd walked away from that life to raise a family and grow old in peace. But now, it felt like everything I tried to leave behind was clawing its way back, and this time, it had propellers. That night, I went into the garage and opened a weathered steel case I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a tangle of cables, scanners, antennae, and signal disruptors. It was like reuniting with an old part of myself, the one I hoped I'd never need again. But Denise wanted a tech war? Fine. I'd give her one. Nothing illegal. Just inconvenient. Immensely inconvenient. The next morning, I sat beneath the shade of our patio umbrella, laptop open and smoothie in hand, pretending to browse emails. At precisely 9:04 a.m., the drone arrived, like clockwork. It hovered with that smug, mechanical hum, camera pointed down like it was sizing me up. I tapped a key and activated a low-power pulse jammer. The drone shuddered, dropped about a foot, then stabilized. From her upstairs window, Denise was probably gripping her controller, thinking the signal cut out or that a gust of wind had thrown it off course. I shut the jammer down and took a long, casual sip from my smoothie, as if nothing had happened. That afternoon, a neighborhood-wide email hit my inbox. Subject line, security alert. In it, Denise warned of foreign interference in our community's safety systems. She encouraged everyone to report suspicious tech behavior. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so on-brand. Denise wasn't unraveling. She was doubling down. Rachel asked me if I was going to report her. I said no. She owned the channels we'd have to report through. The only way to beat someone like Denise was to outmaneuver her, quietly and precisely. This wasn't about revenge. It was about principle, about boundaries, and about what happens when you back the wrong guy into a corner. I spent the next 2 nights tracking the drone's flight patterns like a weatherman watching a hurricane. It flew on a suspiciously tight schedule, once in the morning, right after the school buses pulled away, and again in the late afternoon just before rush hour. It circled the cul-de-sac in slow, deliberate loops, dipping low near specific homes. You could guess who was on Denise's radar based on how long the drone hovered. Mr. Jenkins with the leaning mailbox, the Smiths and their inflatable flamingo, and us, always us. The drone lingered over our deck, our windows. Sometimes it circled twice. She wasn't just policing. She was obsessed. I broke out an old visual rangefinder and confirmed the drone flew between 30 and 40 feet. Technically legal in Oregon, but ethically murky, especially without consent. This wasn't passive observation. It was airborne intimidation. But the detail that stood out most? The drone never strayed far from Denise's fortress. It always stayed within a 3-house radius. That told me 2 things. 1, she didn't trust automation. 2, she was piloting it manually from her upstairs living room. And if she was flying in real time, I had a tactical advantage. The next field test came 2 days later. I let her relax into her routine. She had no idea someone else had joined the game. The drone floated into view, paused over the edge of our yard. I toggled the jammer for just a few seconds. The result? A satisfying twitch, a lurch to the left, and then a shaky hover before it darted back toward her house like a spooked bird. She must have noticed. She just didn't know how to explain it. That night, another email. Subject, digital invaders. She warned the community about possible cyber attacks, calling it a coordinated effort to destabilize neighborhood order. I couldn't stop smiling. Denise was spiraling. But this was just the beginning. Tomorrow, the drone would fly again. And this time, it wasn't coming back in one piece. Denise Caldwell's paranoia had officially gone off the charts. After our last little disruption test, I knew she'd start watching more closely, and sure enough, she did. She sent out a community-wide email blast, warning of potential digital invaders, like we were living in a Cold War spy thriller and Russian hackers had somehow targeted Willowbrook Hills. The way she described it, you'd think the fate of the free world hinged on her drone staying airborne. But she didn't stop at emails. No, she installed 2 new cameras on her front porch and another mounted on a tall pole in her backyard, motion-sensitive, with infrared. She wasn't just monitoring anymore. She was preparing for war. A war with ghosts. I wasn't the only one noticing the creep factor. One afternoon, while I was cleaning the gutters, my next-door neighbor Miguel Alvarez wandered over. Miguel usually kept to himself. He's a mail carrier by trade, observant but quiet. That day, he looked unsettled. "Hey, Oliver," he said, leaning in. "You ever see that thing fly over your grill?" I nodded slowly, playing it cool. I think Denise's drone caught me shirtless last week while I was watering my plants. I've been getting these HOA complaints about unruly appearances. It's getting weird, man. His eyes told me everything. It wasn't just us. The entire cul-de-sac was starting to feel like a fishbowl, with one woman manning the control tower. That night, I moved into phase 2. I had already started building a more permanent solution, a directional jammer, cleverly disguised as a decorative birdhouse. It looked innocent enough, a hand-carved wooden robin perched peacefully on our patio railing. But inside, it was packed with modified signal hardware, legal under state law, as long as it didn't interfere with emergency or commercial systems. I'd tested it at half power. Now, it was time to crank it up. The next morning, Denise's drone arrived right on time, humming softly as it drifted into view. I sipped my coffee, leaned back in my chair, and casually flipped the switch. The drone jerked hard, like it had smacked into an invisible force field. It spun to the left, wobbled dangerously, then leveled out. I shut the jammer off after 5 seconds. It steadied, hovered awkwardly, and zipped back toward Denise's house as if it were retreating in shame. I could picture her watching the screen, confused and tapping her controller like it was glitching. The silence didn't last long. That afternoon, another HOA-wide email hit my inbox. Subject: strange interference event. She accused someone of attempting to sabotage community safety protocols. Attached were blurry screenshots from her drone's feed, grainy stills of my birdhouse and our grill. No proof. No faces. Just a lot of nervous energy and wild speculation. She was unraveling. I could feel it. By the weekend, Denise went full-blown covert ops. She hired a private security firm, likely paid from one of the neighborhood enhancement funds, to install a portable antenna on her roof. I spotted the van, snapped photos, and casually asked one of the installers what it was. He muttered something about signal repeaters and range stability. Translation: she wanted her drone to fly farther and stay under control even if it drifted. She was evolving. But so was I. That evening, Rachel and I sat on the porch under the stars. I showed her the latest jam logs from my laptop. "You're treating this like a mission," she said, eyebrow raised. "That's because it is," I replied. She turned our neighborhood into a surveillance zone. "We're not just residents anymore. We're targets." Rachel sighed. "Just be careful, Oliver. People like her, when they start losing control, they get dangerous." She wasn't wrong. The next day, the drone came back. But this time, it had a new trick. A tiny speaker was attached to the bottom, and as it hovered near our porch, it let out a garbled, robotic message. "This is private property. Please comply with HOA regulations." Rachel nearly choked on her tea. Lily came running outside, wide-eyed. "Is she sending audio messages now?" she asked. "Is this like a flying Karen?" I couldn't help but laugh, though my jaw tightened. This wasn't about rules anymore. Denise wasn't enforcing policy. She was feeding her ego. This was her power play, and she was doubling down. That was the moment I decided the next test would be the last. I upgraded the jammer. Added a signal spoofer. This one didn't just block her drone's commands. It replaced them. A whisper in the machine's ear, leading it in circles it couldn't escape. My target wasn't just any crash site. I had something poetic in mind. Her backyard pool. I had mapped out every route, every glitch, and every fail-safe. The drone's auto-return function was simple: lose signal, and it would retreat to safety. But with my upgraded jammer and new signal spoofer, I could confuse that instinct. Redirect it. Guide it not just into emergency mode, but to a place it couldn't come back from. I scouted various crash zones, gutters, water runoff spots, even the koi pond that Denise Caldwell bragged about in every HOA meeting. But one target stood out. It was poetic, perfect in both irony and spectacle. Her front yard-facing pool, crystal blue and always lit up like a showroom. Front yard privacy violation? Meet backyard poetic justice. I fine-tuned the signal paths, adjusted the transmitter hidden in the birdhouse, and waited. All I needed was her pride to push the drone one step too far. Fate, of course, loves good timing. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for Thursday night. Conveniently, the same day Denise's drone had been flying one of its longest, most invasive patrols to date. I had been counting down the minutes like a man planning a heist. This wasn't going to be a confrontation. It was going to be a performance. Denise thought she was the queen of HOA politics. the master of public manipulation. But she didn't realize she'd walked into a chess match against someone trained to think 12 moves ahead. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to end her reign. And in my jacket pocket was a USB stick that could turn the room against her. The meeting was held in the Willowbrook Hills Rec Center, the same place we hosted neighborhood potlucks and holiday craft nights. But tonight, it was tense. Not festive. Not friendly. Denise strutted in wearing what I could only describe as business casual villain chic. Overly stiff blazer, tablet in hand, and her usual smug grin stretched just a bit too wide. She barely acknowledged anyone as she slid into her spot at the head of the table. The board members, especially Leonard Price, our normally conflict-averse chairman, looked uneasy. The rumors about the drone had moved beyond whispers. People weren't just annoyed. They were uncomfortable. But Denise? She still came in swinging. "Let's begin," she chirped, clapping her hands like she was opening a TED Talk. Item 1. Potential signal interference disrupting our community's aerial safety device. Yes, she actually called it an aerial safety device. Before we discuss that, I said, standing from the second row, I've got something I think the board and everyone else should see. She raised an eyebrow. Mr. Trent, unless you've submitted a motion to be added to the agenda. I haven't, I replied, walking calmly to the projector setup. But this is about neighborhood safety, which, I believe, is something you're quite passionate about. She didn't stop me, just watched as the room dimmed and the screen lit up. Clip after clip played, footage gathered from half a dozen neighbors over the last 2 weeks. The drone hovering over private yards, peeking into second-story windows, dipping low enough to spook pets. One clip showed the drone filming a family's backyard birthday party. You could hear a dad shout, "What the hell is that thing doing near my kid?" Another showed the drone lingering above a trampoline, where 3 children bounced unaware. And then, my final exhibit. A shot from my own setup. Denise, seated in her upstairs living room, controller in hand. Her drone floated outside my daughter Lily's window. The timestamp. The GPS coordinates. Clear as day. A ripple of murmurs moved through the room. One board member, Marcy, leaned forward and asked, "Denise, is that your living room?" Her smile didn't fade, but her jaw twitched. Those videos are taken out of context. I was conducting safety inspections. That's within the HOA's rights. "Since when do we have airspace jurisdiction?" Miguel Alvarez called from the back. Dana Monroe raised her hand. "You flew over my hot tub at night. Was that part of your safety patrol too?" Denise's voice pitched. "The drone is just a tool. If people feel uncomfortable, maybe they should ask why they're drawing attention." The gasp from the crowd was instantaneous. Even her closest allies shifted in their seats. She had crossed from control freak into something far more unsettling. Then Leonard Price, usually the last to speak, cleared his throat. "Denise," he said slowly, "I think it's time we discuss whether your actions have exceeded your role and violated your neighbor's right to privacy." Leonard Price cleared his throat. "Denise," he said carefully, his voice carrying the weight of the entire room. "Based on what we've seen tonight, I believe the board needs to have a private discussion regarding the scope of your authority and whether you've exceeded it." Denise Caldwell shot to her feet, so quickly her chair crashed backward. "This is a setup," she snapped, pointing a trembling finger toward me. "You're all being manipulated by someone with technical skills and a personal vendetta." I shrugged. "Or maybe we're just tired of being watched while we grill burgers and water our plants." Without another word, she stormed out. No rebuttal. No defense. Just the sharp click of her heels and the echo of the rec center door slamming behind her. That should have been the end. But I wasn't finished. I hadn't built a signal spoofer, mapped her drone patterns, and endured weeks of creeping surveillance just for a public takedown. No, I wanted her to understand what it felt like to have her space invaded. To know what it was like when your own sense of control gets hijacked. I had the perfect plan. The following evening was unusually hot. The air sat heavy, unmoving. From the edge of my backyard, I spotted Denise in her element, lounging in her front-facing pool, balanced on a giant pink flamingo float, drink in hand, lights on full blast. Her drone buzzed in slow arcs just above the fence line. Another routine sweep. Same route. Same arrogance. I had my laptop open. Jammer primed. Spoofer ready. I watched the telemetry data trickle in. Her drone, now with its ridiculous speaker attachment, was broadcasting snippets of her voice again, this time slurred slightly. Either she was running a new script, or the wine had kicked in. I activated the spoofer. The drone twitched midair, slowed, turned. Instead of following its usual loop, it began drifting, gradually, toward her backyard. I adjusted the signal injection, mimicking her manual inputs, gently guiding it forward like a puppeteer in the shadows. Denise didn't notice at first. She was laughing at something on her phone, humming softly. Then she heard it, the faint buzz growing louder above her. She looked up. Her eyes widened. What the no? No, no. Back up, she shouted, wobbling on the float. The drone began to spiral, tilting like a drunk bird. I issued the final command. Descend. With a satisfying plop, it dropped straight into the center of her pool. Water splashed high into the air, soaking her from the knees down. She screamed, lost her balance, and tumbled off the float into the shallow end with a splash. The drone's red light blinked twice, then faded. I shut my laptop and leaned back. Mission complete. The next morning, Denise didn't make her usual rounds. No HOA patrols. No early morning emails. No surveillance were overhead. Just silence. Word spread fast. People whispered that the drone had malfunctioned and self-destructed. Some said it was divine justice. Others joked it had gained sentience and chosen freedom. Either way, no one missed it. The air felt lighter. The tension evaporated. For the first time in weeks, I drank coffee on the porch without looking at the sky. But the aftermath? It was even better than I imagined. Denise didn't leave her house for 3 straight days. Her blinds were shut. Porch lights off. Not a single bulletin from the HOA board. For someone who used to treat the neighborhood like her own private army, her silence was eerie. Still, I knew her type. She wouldn't stay buried for long. Sure enough, on the 4th morning, it happened. An inbox explosion. A series of emails from Denise flooded the entire community before 7 a.m., accusing multiple residents of intentional drone sabotage, a crime that, last anyone checked, didn't exist. She called it a coordinated attack on community security and a blatant act of digital terrorism. The language was so dramatic, I had to read parts aloud to Rachel just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. She was spiraling. Hard. Her beloved drone had been top-tier tech. GPS-enabled. Multi-camera. Long-range control. Her pride and joy sunk like a stone in her own backyard. And she couldn't handle the loss. Instead of accepting defeat, she demanded the HOA take emergency action. She called for an investigation. Claimed there was a rogue operator in Willowbrook Hills manipulating wireless frequencies. It was laughable, but also sad, because while she tried to cling to power, the rest of the neighborhood had already moved on. And her drone? It stayed exactly where it belonged, at the bottom of her pool. Denise Caldwell's pride and joy, the drone she'd treated like a crown jewel, had died a watery death right in her own front yard pool. And despite her desperate attempts to rewrite the narrative, everyone in Willowbrook Hills already knew what had happened. Still, she tried to regain control. She marched door to door, visiting every HOA board member with printed packets, each filled with charts, graphs, and snippets of jargon she'd clearly pulled from Google. Her evidence was a maze of meaningless tech terms and assumptions that made no real sense. She threw around words like frequency infiltration and remote override, trying to make it sound like a professional hit. It was anything but. Marcy, the HOA treasurer, couldn't help but burst out laughing during one of Denise's more dramatic rants. "Denise," she said, shaking her head, "you can't just accuse people because your toy took a swim. That only made things worse." Fueled by paranoia and embarrassment, Denise escalated again. She even called the local police, insisting her drone had been brought down illegally through malicious signal interference. According to Miguel Alvarez, who overheard the call from his porch, the responding officer had to bite his lip to keep from laughing when Denise claimed enemy frequencies had hijacked her signal. The best part? The drone's memory card had been fried beyond recovery. The water damage was catastrophic. Whatever footage she had hoped to use as proof was gone. All that remained was a charred circuit board and a soggy, useless frame. By now, the entire neighborhood was watching with a mix of concern and mild entertainment. Denise wasn't just angry. She was unraveling. A few residents quietly suggested she take a break from HOA duties, or maybe even go on a vacation. But Denise Caldwell was not the type to retreat. If anything, public embarrassment only fueled her next move. She launched into a new offensive campaign. This time, she printed flyers. Yes, actual flyers. She taped them to street lamps, mailboxes, and community bulletin boards. The flyers featured blurry screenshots of her drone mid-crash, overlaid with bold red text that read, "Sabotage is a crime." Below that, she quoted an obscure HOA clause about community safety and the consequences of technological interference. It would have been hilarious if it hadn't been so eerily serious. But the real tipping point came later that week, when Denise called an emergency HOA meeting to address what she referred to as the ongoing campaign of hostility directed at her. The meeting was held outdoors, near the community clubhouse. Almost the entire neighborhood showed up. Some brought lawn chairs. A few brought popcorn. The vibe felt more like an outdoor movie screening than a homeowner's meeting. Denise stood behind a folding table flanked by laminated charts and blown-up images of drone telemetry data. She looked wild-eyed but determined. One of the photos, a zoomed-in shot of my patio, showed the birdhouse I had modified to jam her signal. "This," she declared, pointing at the image like it was a smoking gun, "is not a decoration. It is a signal disruptor. I believe it was used to target and disable my property." I didn't even blink. "That's a birdhouse," I said calmly. "Unless you think the robins have formed a resistance movement." The crowd erupted with snickers. Even Leonard Price had to cover his mouth. But Denise pushed on. She insisted that someone, maybe me, maybe several of us, was running a covert operation to sabotage her authority. She claimed to have a list, a theory, patterns. But her wild accusations only backfired. People were tired. Tired of the drone. Tired of the constant citations. Tired of living under the watchful eye of someone who seemed to forget we were neighbors, not suspects. And then, just when it couldn't get more surreal, Dana Monroe raised her hand. "Denise," she said, "are you the one who flew the drone over my bathroom window last month?" Denise froze. Dana continued, "I thought I was imagining things, but now? I'm pretty sure that was your drone. I was brushing my teeth, and it was right there." We locked eyes, and the entire crowd burst into laughter. Not because it was funny in the traditional sense, but because the absurdity had finally tipped into the ridiculous. Leonard Price stood up, clearing his throat. "Denise," he said with finality, "you were never authorized to conduct aerial surveillance of any kind. What you did crossed the line. We'll be suspending your HOA privileges pending an ethics review." And just like that, her power crumbled. Denise Caldwell was officially stripped of her enforcement authority. Her access to the neighborhood newsletter was revoked. For the first time in years, she was just another resident. No more power, no more platform, and absolutely no drones. The next morning, the HOA email didn't come from Denise. It came from Leonard Price. The subject line was simple: policy update, community privacy standards. Effective immediately, it read, "All aerial surveillance over private property is banned within the jurisdiction of Willowbrook Hills. Residents are entitled to privacy. No drones may be used for monitoring, rule enforcement, or unsolicited observation. A formal bylaw revision is in progress." Then came the kicker, also known as the Denise Clause. The neighborhood had a field day with that one. Someone stuck a tiny plastic drone in the community garden with a cardboard tombstone that read, "Rest in pieces." Another neighbor changed their Wi-Fi network name to Enemy Frequency. Miguel Alvarez even crafted a fake HOA badge with a cartoon birdhouse on it and wore it during his morning walks like he was part of a secret resistance. And Denise? She vanished. Her blinds stayed shut. Her porch lights never came on. She stopped attending meetings, skipped community events, and for the first time in anyone's memory, didn't file a single complaint about recycling bins being placed out too early. Was it embarrassment? Anger? Shame? No one knew. What mattered was that she was gone, in every way that counted. Because it wasn't just her drone that crashed. It was her illusion of control. For years, she had built a quiet, invisible grip on the neighborhood, through rules, fear, and surveillance. And it all unraveled not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a slow, inevitable fall she created for herself. I didn't have to force anything. I just nudged her toward the edge and let gravity do the rest. In the silence that followed, Willowbrook Hills finally breathed again. There were no more buzzing cameras overhead. No robotic voices demanding HOA compliance. No more citations for wind chimes or decorative gnomes. The fear, the tension, it all evaporated like morning mist. People began planting flowers again, sitting on porches, letting their kids run barefoot across lawns. Miguel fired up his old grill and hosted spontaneous backyard barbecues that you could hear from 3 houses away. A woman painted her fence teal, and no one cared. It was like the soul of the neighborhood had returned. 3 weeks after Denise's downfall, the HOA board hosted a special community event. They called it Neighborhood Unity Day. It was part healing, part celebration, and a great excuse to throw a massive cookout. Everyone brought something. Homemade dishes, coolers full of lemonade, lawn games. Lily helped set up a cornhole game, and Rachel passed out napkins while chatting with neighbors I hadn't seen smile in months. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't glancing at the sky every 10 minutes to make sure we weren't being filmed. The mood was light, easy, real. About halfway through the event, Leonard Price stepped onto the small stage near the gazebo. He tapped the mic and cleared his throat. "Before we wrap up," he said, "we'd like to recognize a neighbor who played a unique role in restoring peace, privacy, and sanity to Willowbrook Hills." He held up a shiny little trophy. It was shaped like a drone, with googly cartoon eyes and 2 melted-looking propellers. The plaque on the base read, "For outstanding service in aerial pest control, Oliver Trent." The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. I stood frozen for a moment, half laughing, half blushing. Rachel nudged me. "Go on, hero." I walked up and took the trophy, gave a mock military salute. People roared. Someone shouted, "Don't let him near your sprinklers. He'll reprogram them into laser turrets." I laughed along with them, but deep down, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: relief. We didn't just defeat a surveillance drone. We reclaimed our sense of neighborhood, of peace, of privacy. And the best part? I never had to raise my voice. It was all in good fun. The trophy wasn't about recognition. It was about the message. "We saw what you did," it said without needing to. "We're grateful, not just for jamming a drone, but for standing up when no one else could." Even Denise Caldwell's husband, Greg, gave me a polite nod from across the park. He looked like someone who had aged 10 years in 3 weeks. Word around the neighborhood was that Greg had begged her to ditch the drone months ago. He tried to stop the spiral before it started. Now he mostly walked their dog alone, head down, saying little. If there was relief in her downfall, he didn't show it. But he didn't resist it either. That evening, Rachel and I sat on the porch, watching the sky melt from orange to blue behind the rooftops. Lily was inside, video chatting with her friends, probably reliving Neighborhood Unity Day and the ridiculous drone trophy. Rachel leaned back in her chair and let out a quiet chuckle. "It's crazy, isn't it? All of this started with a barbecue." I smiled. "And a very nosy drone." She looked over, amused. "Do you regret any of it?" I thought about it for a moment. No. Denise needed to learn that privacy still matters. That control has limits. And honestly, watching her drone do a perfect belly flop into her own pool, worth every second. Rachel laughed so hard she nearly spilled her lemonade. "You really planned that right down to the splash, didn't you?" "Every inch of it," I said, proud and unapologetic. The next morning, I dusted off a little side project from the garage. A drone, not for spying, but for fun. It had no cameras, no speakers, just a basic controller and a tiny basket underneath. It was something Lily and I had started building months ago, but never finished. She had the idea to make it a snack drone, one that could deliver cookies while she did homework in the backyard. I got it working just after lunch. It hovered gently over the lawn, wings humming softly. Lily squealed with joy when it dropped a granola bar near her feet. She clapped and gave me a double thumbs up. I couldn't help but grin. Denise had used tech to control and intimidate. We were using it to connect. The problem had never been the technology. It was always the person behind the controls. Around noon, Miguel Alvarez strolled over, holding a small package and grinning like he'd won the lottery. "Got a minute, Oliver?" He handed me a wooden plaque, handcrafted and varnished. Laser engraved on it was the silhouette of a birdhouse and the words, "For tactical bravery in the face of HOA tyranny." I nearly dropped it laughing. "You made this?" "Built it, sanded it, even debated adding blinking LEDs, he said proudly. But subtlety felt more powerful. By then, The story of what had happened had taken on a life of its own. New residents whispered about the drone saga like it was neighborhood folklore. Someone suggested we turn it into a Halloween theme. Kids could dress up as drones, birdhouses, or angry HOA officials. It wasn't a bad idea. As for Denise, she faded into the background. She still lived in Willowbrook Hills, technically, but you wouldn't know it. Her blinds stayed shut. Her yard became overgrown. Her mailbox overflowed with junk, mail no one bothered to collect. It was like the neighborhood had kept going and left her behind. The HOA board eventually passed a full revision of the bylaws. No surveillance equipment allowed without full community consent. All citations had to be supported by human observation, not drones. The rule was unofficially known as the Denise Clause. Most of the newer residents didn't know why that clause existed. But those of us who'd lived through it always smirked when it was brought up. And me? I finally got to enjoy the little things again. I could mow the lawn without worrying about a citation for grass height. Drink coffee on the porch without checking the skies. Plant a wind chime without fear of being fined for sound pollution. My house felt like my own again. One night, just before bed, I saw her. Denise stood in her driveway, alone, staring up at the stars. She looked tired, older somehow, like someone who had poured all their energy into controlling others, only to be left with silence. For a moment, I considered waving, but she turned and walked inside before I could. Rachel came out a few minutes later and leaned against my shoulder. "You think she'll try again?" she asked. I shook my head. She had her chance. She built a throne out of paranoia and turned herself into a cautionary tale. If she ever tries anything again, this time the whole neighborhood will be ready. Rachel smiled. Good. Because I like the peace. So did I.